Python Programming for Beginners, Understanding Conditional Statements, Loops, Functions, and Modules.
Welcome to our second video on Python Basics on Smart Architectural Programming. My name is Mohammed, and coding alongside me is
George, and as Mohammed specified, we'll be doing the second iteration of Python Basics. I'll let you take over, Mohammed.
So in this particular video, we're going to focus on four fundamental concepts related to Python, which are conditional statements, loops, functions, and modules and imports. So the first thing we're going to focus is on conditional statements. Now, I might be repeating myself here, but we need to understand why these concepts that we're going over are very, very important. You are unable to create as a programmer any functional script or software if you're not familiar with these basic concepts, because these are what you need to actually create logics that work to meet whatever goal that you want your software algorithm to meet. So, for example, building up on that particular statement towards conditional statements is, if you have a particular aspect or condition, you need the data that you are dealing with in your program to meet, then you need to use conditional statements. If you don't use that, there is probably no alternative to that that you could leverage, because without to test that specific condition that you're looking for in that piece of data. So in this case, for example, if you look at our example here, we create a variable called age, which equals to 18. Now we need to test for whether the age is less than 20, whether it's less than 30, or these two test cases, and then we need to default back to a value if those test cases are not met. Now, a simple if-else statement is mostly probably people who have coded before might be familiar with that. If this is the condition, you do this, else you default back to something that happens if the condition does not meet. But you can put in more than one condition. Those are else if statements. In Python, we call them elif, as you can see in line 5. And you can add as many elif statements as possible in your code to test out for as many different conditions you want to test your data or whatever you're testing out for in your program. But after a certain amount of elif statements, when it becomes a little too long, there might be a better way you could do that. So keep that in mind, because extensive use of elif statements might not be regarded as good practice. So in this case, we test for if age is less than 20, we print you're a teenager. If age is less than 30, we print you're in your 20s. And if you don't meet these two conditions, you're older than 30s. So else statement is something you need to have an if else statement, or if elif or else statements. You can do without elif statements, but you can't do without else statements. That would be a huge syntax error if you don't have else statements within your piece of code, because the code needs to know that if none of the conditions are met, what exactly I need to do in that case. You need to cover that basis for the code to work to properly. The computer that you're dealing with is not intelligent. It needs to be told, just like a child, exactly what it needs to do. Do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. If you don't specify that, you're going to have problems. That is why in if-else statements, you need to test, or you need to basically cover all cases. If this is the condition, else covers every other condition, right? If condition is not met, use else. And that is basically all there is to know about conditional statements. Again, these are very, very important if you need to build functional softwares or programs or scripts in Python or any other language, because these concepts do carry over from one language to another. The next concept that we need to go over is loops. Now, loops are also very important, because in some cases, you want to, under certain conditions, run a piece of code over and over and again until that condition is true. So basically, let's say you want to print I am happy on the console until you're sad. How are you going to do that? I mean, you could simply just write print statement after print statement after print statement, but that wouldn't make sense, because in that case you'll have to actually write down all exactly how many times you want I am happy to be there. And in some, if you want that to be printed out as long as a certain condition is met, condition statements can't do that. And there would be a limited amount of responses you can, there could be a, it would not, though that particular statement would not be printed infinitely. It would only be printed the amount of times you have coded that within a structure, within your script or code. So to counter that problem, what we do, we use loops. So I can, the code would print I am happy as long over and over and again in just a single line. It would just keep running that piece of code that or logic that you've written until a certain condition is met that exits from that loop. Or and that is where we come to our next important concept about loops. That is, you always need to have control in your loop. If you don't have control in your loop, you might crash your program by running the loop infinitely. And based on that, we have two types of loops that you can use: for loops and while loops. For loops are used mostly in most cases. While loops, there are certain cases while they are preferred because of certain aspect of their utility, but in most cases people use for loops. But again, they're exactly the same. You can you can exchange the usage between them quite easily. But it just, how much you're comfortable with the particular loop in certain conditions. So if you look at line 2, we'll see an example of a for loop, which is for I in range, which is 5. So this is going to print from 0 to 5 until 5, because that is the control we have set. So I, when we write print I, it's going to print I, which is automatically going to start from the lowest denominator in integers that in every programming language, 0, and it starts from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to print that. So it's going to be 0. It sees I is there. It sees what's I's value. It's 0. It tests it's within the range of 5 and prints I. Then 1, it's within the range of 5, so it prints 1. So on and so forth until it reaches 5, where it sees it's still in the range of 5, it prints 5. But when I becomes 6, that's where the control that you set up called range 5 hops in to exit from this loop. So 6 is not within the range of 5, so the loop exits and it does not print any further. Similarly, in while loops, now this is an example. We look at an example of while loop on line 6. What's important about while loops is that control is extremely important in while loops, because otherwise you can easily create infinite loops, and that is definitely going to crash your program and create problems. A lot of people have these problems when they're beginning to code with loops, particular while loops. So this is very, very important to set up control. And how do we set up control? We have defined a variable called count equals to 1. You can set a control in many ways, but this is how we're setting it up here. Count equals to 1, while count is less than equals to 5. Now, this is exactly what we're doing in for loop above, but in a different manner using a different loop. That's a while loop. So as long as the count variable that we sent at 1 is less than 5, less than equals to 5, not just less than 5. So up till 5, it's going to print the statement, whatever the count is at that stage. And this, how do you make sure that this actually make sure that it just not infinitely prints 1 over and over and again? We under every loop logic, we add 1 to the count variable to make sure it increase it. The more it goes through the loop, every time it goes through the loop, the counter is increased by 1. So by the time it reaches 5, it still goes through the loop, but by the time it reaches 6, it exits the loop. Now there's one small difference in both of the loop examples that we looked into for loop and while loop. There's one difference between them. The for loop, we printed 0 as well. The while loop, we did not do that because we defined the counter to start from 1. If you don't define a specific integer in a for loop, it's going to start from 0. Like most counting starts in programming from 0. So that's going to be given. But if you define it like we defined it in while loop, it's going to start from where you defined the value to start from. So that is a very important distinction to keep in mind when you're working with loops, other than the control statements and the things that we discussed just now. After loops, the next thing we're going to focus on is functions. So what are functions? Now, imagine you're dealing with a code base that's 100 lines long, 100 lines long, right?